Now, let's talk about TikTok, because in America last week, the House of Representatives passed by quite a large majority a bill to force TikTok, or the company that owns TikTok, ByteDance, to force ByteDance to sell to a US entity within 6 months or face removal from web servers and so on, effectively be banned if they don't sell to an American company. That bill will now move to the Senate, where it seems that opinion is slightly more divided. But the Biden administration, the White House, is in support of the bill, and President Biden will sign it if it comes onto his desk. I'm delighted to be joined by Matthew Continetti, who is at the American Enterprise Institute and has written about TikTok before, and the former Conservative Party leader and MP for Chingford, Iain Duncan Smith. Matthew, I'll start with you. Just give us a little overview of whether you think this bill is going to pass the Senate. Is it going to be kicked into the long grass? What are the chances of TikTok actually being forced out of the Chinese Communist Party's hands?
I do think the chances are better than 50-50 that the Senate passes the bill and President Biden signs it. It may not happen prior to Election Day, but I could see this bill passing in the lame duck session after the election in November. And I think it's a sign of how quickly the opinion of the political class in the United States has shifted. Whereas attempts to force a sale of TikTok looked doomed as recently as 6 months ago, they now have some momentum behind them.
Yes, but the obstacle, just quickly, Matthew, the obstacle is on the Republican side, interestingly, from Donald Trump, who has been, as president, he was very against TikTok. He almost signed an executive order to ban TikTok. And yet now he and a lot of his allies are coming out strongly against the ban. What's going on there?
They have. Trump, I think, has reevaluated his position on TikTok several times in just the past few weeks. When the bill was right before the bill passed overwhelmingly in the House of Representatives, Donald Trump voiced his opposition to it, saying essentially that Facebook, an American company, was worse than TikTok. But that didn't stop many Republicans, most Republicans in the House of Representatives, for voting for the ban. And since the ban passed the House, or the fire sale bill passed the House, Trump has slightly changed his tune. He's now saying it'd be fine if TikTok was sold to an American company, but he still has that personal grudge against Facebook and other American tech companies for banning him for a few years after January 6, 2021.
Iain, Britain has copied America before on, for instance, banning TikTok on government phones. America did it, we followed suit. I think you're in favour of, if this goes through, of Britain following suit again and banning TikTok or forcing it to be owned by a non-China affiliated company.
Yeah, it was actually because of the pressure that we put up through the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, which has actually got about 33 different countries now in it, politicians on the left and the right. And we were all clamoring for us to deal with TikTok. TikTok is without question a data harvester. And the data is accessible through ByteDance to the CCP, and they use it. They have this national security law which allows them to say to any company in China, hand your data over, and they must do it. And of course, these companies are very close to the Chinese authorities because that's the way it is. So what it does is it collects data on all sorts of stuff. People say, why would you care about how much data? Well, because they sift that data. So imagine if somebody in 10 years' time starts to look important or something and gets into government or is doing an important job. They have been building a background on that individual for some time, plus also any lazy, as it were, security breaches on TikTok. So TikTok is a data harvester. The Chinese know it, the Americans know it. The second bit of it, yes, the government's gone as far as saying that it must be taken off government phones, but that's an easy ask because it's probably not been on government phones at all. Where it is, it's on the private telephones of government ministers, which beggars belief that you say to them, take it off the government phone. But people like Grant Shapps are busy using it on the peculiar view that they get in touch and get down with the younger kids. I'm afraid no matter how hard they try, that's not going to happen. But the reality is, therefore, it should be a ban immediately off government officials' private telephones. And I am in favor of us following suit with America to say, look, I don't see why we should continue with this here. Either it gets sold or it gets banned. And interestingly enough, you said something about Donald Trump there, but the truth is Trump was very keen to get it banned a few years ago. But as I say, never hold him to his own personal views because they shift around. But I suspect it's more a case of he hates Biden, and therefore anything proposed by the Biden administration is a non-goer. So in reality, I wasn't surprised that the House of Representatives actually passed this, because I was over there in December and I did talk to a number of them. And when we touched on China, it does get them motivated, and TikTok was part of that.
Well, there's also the question of the conservative mega donor Jeff Yass, who I believe has a 15% stake in ByteDance, and just before Trump came out against or in favor of TikTok at Mar-a-Lago, I think he'd just met Yass beforehand. So there's some suspicion about that. But you touch on the data harvesting and the sort of spyware element of TikTok, which is, of course, an obvious threat that it poses. But the other, perhaps broader and bigger threat is as a tool of mass propaganda. And last week, a story that involved the Spectator, Britain rules, or an amendment in the Lords, which you supported, said that the UAE, a UAE-backed fund, cannot have a national newspaper in Britain. The Telegraph and us at the Spectator cannot be owned by a foreign entity which raises national security concerns. That's all well and good, but newspapers are increasingly, in terms of the way people get their news, the way people understand information, less and less relevant. What really matters is actually TikTok and short video form content. So in terms of just propaganda and a foreign government owning a huge vehicle for it, that's the other big concern, is it not?
Oh, yes, yeah. I mean, I took it as read that everybody had already understood that we were about to ban the foreign government investment in the Telegraph, but not alone from that. We should ban all government investment from any of our news media in the United Kingdom. And of course, TikTok falls within that, because all these places like TikTok just pump out information. Very little of it actually sifted first to check whether it's real. And in other cases, propaganda, which as we approach an election will be very helpful for us to have curtailed a lot of that.
Matthew, there's a lot of talk on TikTok, surprisingly enough, about how what's changed in recent months, because there's been moves to ban TikTok for quite some time, but they've suddenly gained a lot of momentum in recent months in America. And a lot of people on TikTok are making the suggestion, and perhaps it's anti-Semitic even to suggest it, but that what has changed is that a lot of people in Washington are very concerned about the way Israel has lost the information war on TikTok, and that young people who use TikTok a lot are far more likely to be radically against Israel in its war with Hamas. And that is the thing that's changed recently in Washington, and that has caused this bill to go through further than it's gone before.
I reject that interpretation. That's not the real story of this bill. What's happened was a under the surface effort on a bipartisan basis through this special committee on China led by Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin to bring a large majority of the Congress, of the House of Representatives, to the point where they understood why it was necessary to force a sale of TikTok to an American or Western company. The anti-Semitic propaganda that's being unleashed at huge volumes on TikTok, along with the viral Bin Laden was right video that circulated widely after October 7th, all were part of, I think, the indictment against TikTok as a means of influence operations by the CCP in the Western world. And I would say, too, that when this bill looked like it was going to pass, TikTok itself told its users to lobby the Congress against it. And that, in a way, proved Chairman Gallagher's argument that TikTok could be used as a tool of influence operations in a quite open way if the interests of ByteDance or of the CCP were seen to be threatened. And I think many congressmen reacted to that in a negative way and did not want to be bullied by this Chinese-owned company into taking legislative steps. So it's not October 7th that's changed. It's I think the patient work of persuasion below the radar that helped us get to this bill passing the House of Representatives last week.
And Iain, to what extent do you think we could be overly paranoid about what China is doing with TikTok? Because, I mean, do we believe that the sort of CCP puts out a message that gets through to TikTok somehow saying we need to convert mass opinion against Israel, or we need to, make Westerners question all their values on everything? To what extent can we prove that China is doing this, and to what extent is it paranoia?
Well, I don't think it is paranoia. I mean, this is a country that's committing genocide in Xinjiang, forced labor in Tibet. It produces stuff by slavery, has absolute control, smashes churches, rounds up people who believe in religion, and anybody that speaks out against the line of the government. You've just seen Law 23 now initiated in Hong Kong. And what does that do? It basically makes it a criminal offense so that a journalist who might publish something that was critical of the government could get up to 10 years imprisonment. So the crackdown goes on, and it's in the way that the President Xi has behaved since he came into power that has driven all of this. It's not paranoia. It's actually, I think, not enough information has crossed the bows, as it were, of those who believe in freedom and human rights, etc., because they always want to measure people by their own levels of understanding. In fact, China is a completely different world. The Chinese government has the complete capability to command, ByteDance, to hand over data, and in return to do what they ask. There is no question, no company in China owned by any Chinese citizen is going to defy the CCP, because what comes next is absolute destruction of that individual. They will become non-persons, and at worst, they'll be locked up for a long time. They know what comes. So you cooperate with the Chinese government. And also, it's worth reminding ourselves that many of those Chinese companies get going because they use Chinese government money. They get these huge loans from the Chinese government, such as Huawei did, to undercut all bids in the developed world. So as a result of that, if you take telecommunications, there are only 3 companies left that are not Chinese in this national issue. And we had a big row about it here, about whether Huawei should run our 5G telecommunications network. But there are literally only 3 other companies, 2 in Scandinavia, 1 in South Korea. Why? Because all the American companies, the British companies and others, have bailed out of the market because there's no money in it, because China, against the WTO, disrupts that market. So everything you hear about China, unusually, is probably true. They are a dictatorial, brutal state, and they brook no alternatives. And that's why it is a danger for us to have TikTok into young people's minds, because it really takes them into places basically that are ridiculous.
Well, on that note, we shall end it there. Thank you very much, Iain and Matthew.